Hi there, this is Ronnie coming at you with a video. Interesting. I use that word advisedly. Interesting conversation happening on the RPG Brigade Facebook page. Essentially, someone was asking, does this hobby need to have a couple of big powerhouses in it, like D&D and Pathfinder, or does the hobby actually, is it better for having lots of little games going about? Now, my opinion rather falls to the second, not because of any predisposition about D&D and Pathfinder, but because I happen to think that it's just I like lots of choice, and I think lots of choice is a good thing for a hobby. Now, I made that point, and I say that as someone who is not, I'm on the record as saying I'm not a D&D player. But one guy, and usually I do not name them, but I'm going to in this case, Marko Savic, basically he made an offhand comment about, well, playing D&D is never a good idea. Now, I retorted that whilst D&D 5th or D&D in general doesn't really do it for me, that's only because I don't like the price of the books. I don't like the price of the books, and I don't like, I've got lots of generic fantasy. But a lot of people enjoy it, a lot of people like it, and why the hell not? If they like it and they enjoy it and they enjoy playing it, why demean them? His argument sort of degenerated into, well, D&D is just combat. You wouldn't get that with Fate. Now, this guy thinks that Fate is the pinnacle of all rule systems. Now, he is entitled to his view. If he feels that Fate is the very best rule system that he has played, that that's the one that works for him, great. More power to his arm. But to be so utterly and completely dismissive of others, to be disrespectful to others, I find quite nauseating. But I also found, and this is really the point of this video, I found the idea that he was coming across with utterly stupid. The idea that Fate can't be used for, the way he sort of described it was a slaughter, essentially sort of high action, sort of high action, big body count, kind of body count fantasy. And he just cannot get it into his head, or didn't want to get it into his head, or couldn't get it into his head, that of course it can. Of course Fate can be used that way. Which I mentioned. Any system, I said, could be used that way. And any system can. When you get right down to it, any system can be used. If you take any game system, it doesn't even have to be fantasy. Any game system, you can turn it into a slaughterhouse of a game, if you really wanted to. You might not be using the system to its optimum, but anything can be run as a slaughterhouse, even something that is very character driven. I mean, rather hilariously, he said that I had obviously never played Fate or World of Darkness, which I found hilarious because I've played both. You know, it's an arrogant assumption that I cannot stand. But the point I wanted to make to him, and the reason I'm doing this video, is any game system can be used for any style of game within reason. Some games do it better than others. Some games lend themselves, just by most of the mechanics and so on, than other games. That's true. But there's, you know, you can run a purely political game using D&D. Now, aficionados will tell you you're not really using D&D to its optimum if you know, it's kind of high on intrigue, low on combat. And, you know, that may or may not be true, but it can be done. With a game like Fate or a game like World of Darkness, one of these games that is kind of seen to be very social, sort of high on intrigue and so on, it's undeniably it's you know, it's undeniable that you can run a complete slaughterhouse of a game with it. Of course you can. Anyone can. You know, it's entirely stupid notion that you can't do it. Utterly insane. Got into another tete-a-tete with someone which I just found it strange. He used an analogy which I got the point of his analogy, but I thought he made, you know, the analogy kind of missed a bit. He was referring to D&D as beer, and beer gets him into the party, and then he sees all the other alcoholic drinks. And I said, well, the problem with that is, what if you're someone who's teetotal? To keep up with his analogy, you might not want to go to the party because you think there's no drinks there, because all you hear about is alcohol, alcohol, alcohol. So why don't we say, hey, that, you know, there's non-alcoholic drinks there as well? But he got a bit shirty about that, saying I didn't understand his analogy and shit like that. So I ended up blocking him because, you know, started shouting, which is really just fucking rude. But main point, any role-playing game can be used for anything in terms of rule system. To use two examples, I use my top two games, and yes, I am quite prepared to accept that I am using my top two games here. Top two games, Castle Falkenstein. Now, Castle Falkenstein can be used for any tone or genre. You can have a mass slaughter with that if you want it. High action, high body count, blum 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 blum. You can also have it as lots of intrigue, tension, horror, you know, it can be done. Cult, which is, you know, still my favorite horror system. I fully accept that Cthulhu 7th is looking good as a nice system, but I'm still very much a fan of Cult. Cult can be run as a slaughter. It's almost its default setting as a slaughter, but you can also run it as just an absolute mindfuck where there's very little violence or action or anything like that, but it's still brutal as hell, emotionally and psychologically. So this notion that generic game, particularly generic games. How the fuck can you say that a generic game can't be used for a slaughterhouse game? That's fucking stupid. You take any generic system, and I'm not even talking generic on one genre. I'm talking about fully generic, like Fate or True 20 or Savage Worlds, GURPS. Of course you can run a fucking slaughterhouse because they're designed to run any kind of game you want. From high intrigue, high political stuff, big character pieces, all the way down to walking into a tavern and just fucking everyone up. It's just a mind-numbingly stupid thing to say. So I'm kind of throwing it out there, guys. Do you think that there's any such thing as a game style within a particular genre that your system cannot handle? Or have I missed some? Have I missed something? Is there certain games? There's certain styles, like a fantasy game. There's certain kind of fantasies that can't run. Sci-fi games, there's certain kind of sci-fi it can't run. Or, is Marco just talking shit?